Well, the title of my message today is Built for Battle. Built for Battle. In this life that we live, we will experience battles, we will experience troubles, we will experience struggles, we will experience hardship. In fact, it is a guarantee in Scripture. I want to give us a definition to use when I say the word battle so that we understand what I'm talking about. Battle is a sustained fight or struggle to achieve something or to resist something. So a battle is something that's a sustained fight or struggle that allows me to go after something, to achieve something, or to resist something and to stay away from something. So some of us today, we've come into this place today and we're in a financial battle, or we might be in a physical battle, or it might be an emotional battle. You might be in a battle over your mental health. You might be in a battle in your marriage. You might be in a battle with a sibling. Might be in a battle with a parent. That whatever you come in here today facing, you're experiencing a real life battle. Could be some kind of internal struggle that you're dealing with, or it could be something that's manifested itself in an external means, but you are battling. And I find that sometimes God will, through prayer, change our situation and change our circumstance. Or God will use that situation or circumstance to change me. Or sometimes I got to go into the situation, I got to do some fight. I got to do some warfare. The Bible says we don't battle against flesh and blood, but we battle against principalities and evil forces. So the battle is not with your sibling. The battle is with an evil force. The battle is not with your spouse. The battle is with a very real enemy. And I want to talk about how we're to approach these battles in this thing called life, because I have a mentor that said to me all the time growing up, said, Christina, new levels bring new devils, and promotions bring bigger problems. And so no matter where you're at in life, no matter what next level you go to, you're going to experience a new battle. In fact, I break it down like this. The reward for having a baby is a lifetime of parenting. The reward for getting engaged is planning a wedding. The reward for getting married is learning to live with someone. The reward for buying a house is learning to care for it. All these things that, yes, are victories and amazing accomplishments, also have an accompanying challenge and difficulty and season. John 16:33 says, in this world, you will have trouble. Not might, not occasionally, not every now and then. You will have trouble. But take heart, for I have overcome the world. Psalm 46:1. God is our refuge and strength, and ever-present help in times of trouble. Not from trouble, but in trouble. And I think most of us try to go through life avoiding any kind of difficulty, any kind of trial, any kind of struggle, any kind of hardship. But the reality is God oftentimes uses those very circumstances we're trying to avoid to strengthen us, to train us, to discipline us, to prepare us for what he wants to do in and through our lives next. So what I see as trouble, God actually sees as training. What I see as a struggle, God sees as strengthening. What I see as punishment, God sees as preparation. And so we've got to shift our perspective of the battle, stop resenting the battle, and stop seeing the battle for what it's worth. And I want to share with us a story that if you spent any time in Sunday school, this is one of the most known stories of all time. The story of David and Goliath. You know the story of David and Goliath. Story about this young shepherd boy who goes to battle against a giant. Now, I want to paint a picture because sometimes when we become very familiar with a story, we forget some of the details. So I want us to understand some of the details of what is happening in this battle. You see, at this point in time when David battles against Goliath, the Philistines and the Israelites are at battle, at war with one another. And for 40 days, there has been a standoff. For 40 days, Goliath, who is 9 feet 9 inches tall, a genuine giant, 9 feet 9 inches tall, is coming every morning and every night to taunt the Israelites. Say, who are you going to send to fight me? Demanding someone to come fight him. Now, Goliath, at 9 feet 9 inches tall, has a special curved sword that he wears on his back that for easy use, he can do what he needs to. He also carries a spear that is 15 pounds heavy. 15 pounds. He walks with an armor bearer who walks in front of him. Now, there were two types of shields. There was the round circular shield, but what he had was a full body shield. So he had a man who would walk in front of him with this full body shield to protect him. So you've got a 9'9" tall giant who has a 15-pound spear, a sword, armor from head to toe, a bronze helmet, as well as this giant full body shield in front of him. And he's saying, somebody come fight me. Now at this time, David is not even 20 years old. We don't know his exact age, but he's not 20 years old because he's not yet of fighting age. So his three brothers were all of fighting age, which would have been 20 years of age or older. And he's not even there to fight in battle. He's actually there delivering food. So he was the Uber Eats guy. He was bringing the food to the brothers so that they had some nourishment. And so he's showing up, and he hears this giant, 9'9" tall, taunting. Now, he's not just taunting the men. He's taunting the God they serve. He's taunting the provision of their God. He's taunting their ability to be delivered by their God. And David hears this and is like, not on my watch. I may be here to deliver some food, but I'm not going to let no one ever talk about my God this way. Now, he's a young boy dressed as a shepherd, and he gets in the way of what Goliath is trying to do. So if you read in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 34 through 36, and then verses 45 through 50. It's a big chunk of scripture, but we have to understand in order to appreciate this battle. It says in verse 34, David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping your father's sheep. When a lion or bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear." Then in verse 45, David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with the sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom I have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands. I will strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those who gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." Then in verse 48, as the Philistine army moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, without a sword in his hand, and he struck down the Philistine and killed him. Let's pray. Jesus, we thank you for the opportunity we have to learn, to grow, to develop. God, I pray that today you would strengthen us for whatever battle we find ourselves in today. God, I pray that the words that are of me would fall to the floor, and words that are of you, Jesus, would pierce our hearts. In your name I pray. Amen. Here's the point that I want us to understand today, is that the blessing ahead will always be greater than the battle behind. The blessing ahead will always be greater than the battle behind. In fact, I believe this so strongly that I think if you knew the blessing that was coming, you would understand the magnitude of the battle that you're fighting. The problem is, so often when we get into a battle, our human nature takes over, and we run and hide, we sit down and quit, and we don't engage the fight. Now, we can't do battle on the sidelines. We can't do battle sitting silently, and we can't do battle waiting for someone else to fight our fight. We are called, we are equipped, and we are built for the battle that God has placed in our hands. Every single season of my life has been marked by a battle that has produced great blessing. every single significant season, I can trace back to a specific battle that produced a great blessing. For 10 years, Andrew and I wrestled with infertility. This day was actually a very difficult day for me. It's why I have such a strong empathy for anyone who's ever gone through infertility. Because for almost a decade, we, every single Mother's Day, had believed that that would be our last Mother's Day, that we would ever not have children, and yet another Mother's Day would pass, and I was still not a mom. That battle produced the greatest blessing. I not only got one baby, I got two babies. Double for the trouble. And as the doctor said, BOGO. The doctor literally said, BOGO, buy one, get one. And it's true. You buy one baby, you actually get two deliveries at the same price. So it's pretty awesome. Big battle, bigger blessing. I was battling depression for a big chunk of my life. I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder, battled depression, and that battle is what led to me now getting my PhD in psychology so I can help people combat the battles that they're facing. That battle has produced one of the most beautiful blessings that I get to walk in. I was abused as a child, for years, horrifically abused. That battle produced a blessing where I got to travel on behalf of the Miss America organization as Miss Alaska all over the country and speak about breaking the cycle of silence around child abuse. And I saw thousands of children come forward confessing to what was happening at home behind closed doors. Those children were freed because of my battle. I also grew up as a pastor's kid, hated church and ministry, and swore two things. I would never be a pastor, and I would never marry a pastor. In fact, on our first date, Andrew and I are on a blind date. On our first date, I say, hey, just so you know, I'm not marrying a pastor. He said, well, it's a first date, so we'll see how this goes. And I felt so stupid, but I was that adamant. I am not marrying a pastor, and I am not going into ministry. And now look, I'm married to a pastor. I am a pastor, and I believed in it so much, we invested our savings to plant this church. How silly and ridiculous is that? But that battle produced this blessing. Literally every single major milestone in my life, I can look back to the battle that ensued that produced the blessing that I now walk in and have inherited and have been blessed by as a result of what I did then. Don't let anyone rob you of your battle blessing. Don't let what anyone has ever done to you be bigger than what Jesus did for you. No matter who has taken your voice, no matter who has harmed you, no matter who has delayed or denied or detoured you, no matter what has ever been done to you, do not let it limit you. Do not let it stop you. Do not let it derail you. You keep fighting, you keep pursuing, and you keep trusting that the God who delivered David is going to deliver you. That's the goodness of the God we serve. He is faithful to deliver us, and he promises to show up every single time. And I think so often we get misguided thinking that the fight is only about someone or something. We forget the battle is actually within. We have to win the internal fight before we can ever deal with an external fight. And there's some important lessons we learn from how David navigated this battle that I think if we can implement, it'll change the way we experience the victory that God has for us. Number one, you have to remember the victories. Remember the victories. Here's what we see David do as he's getting ready to go to battle with Goliath. This is what happens in 1 Samuel 17, 34 through 36. David said to Saul, so this is David reminding Saul of what happened. David says to Saul, your servant has been keeping your father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it. I struck it. I rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair. I struck it and I killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. What is David doing? He's reminding Saul of his prior victories, but he's reminding himself of his prior victories. He's reminding himself and remembering how God has provided in his past. And if God was faithful to provide then, God will be faithful to provide now. Now, most people look at those seasons where David was in obscurity and he's out in the middle of a field, out in the highlands, away from everyone, by himself tending sheep. Most people would interpret that season as a season of punishment or a season of obscurity or a season of not being known. But what David knew is it wasn't punishment, it was preparation. That season, when he was doing battle with the lion and the bear, was the very battles he had to fight and conquer in order to know he could slay a Philistine giant. He had to fight those battles before this battle came in order to know that he was able to fight and win. We never want a victory premature. We try to hurry God along going, hey, God, right now is when I want the victory. Today, Tuesday at 3 p.m., that's when I want my victory. Okay, God? We forget. God doesn't operate on our timeline. God's omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipowerful. He doesn't operate on our timeline, and praise God for it. He operates on his perfect timeline. You know, when the twins were born, because they were twins are oftentimes born premature. And so my twins were born premature. And Adriana was able to skip the NICU, even at 5 pounds, 13 ounces. She didn't have to spend any time in the NICU, but Justice did have to spend time in the NICU. And if you've ever had a child go through anything that's remotely dangerous, it's a pretty scary thing, because here we have battled infertility almost a decade. We're celebrating, yes, we have babies. And then, oh, by the way, one of them is having difficulty breathing. And so I'm staying with Adriana, and Andrew goes with Justice up to the NICU, and they intubate him and put tubes down his throat, and we watch this machine go onto his mouth, and we're going, oh my goodness. And what we learned was that a big blessing at the wrong time is not ready to be experienced yet. Justice came into the world early, huge blessing, but he wasn't ready for the world. And so he had to spend some time in an incubation period to prepare himself and his lungs for what the world was going to throw at him. Some of us, we're in that incubation time, and we're resenting it, and we hate it, and we don't want to fight this battle anymore. That very time of incubation is the very thing that's going to prepare you for the success and the victory that Jesus has for you. You don't want that victory at the wrong time. When I was a high schooler, I worked at a place called Odie's Diner, and I was on bread making duty, which meant I was up at 3 in the morning, drove all the way to Odie's Diner, which where we lived in Alaska meant it was at least a 30-minute drive, had to be there early, open up to make the bread. Now, last service, I didn't have a single bread maker. Do we have any bread makers in this service? Any bread makers? Literally, nobody makes bread anymore. Okay, one. Brittany, thank you. Okay, we have a bread maker in the church. So I'm going to explain this then in more detail, because nobody makes bread anymore, which I understand, because people like me, we're making it for you, so you could just go buy it. I get it. But when you're making bread, you would have to combine all the ingredients, and you would let it sit, and you would let it rise. And as that bread would rise, it would usually double in size. Now, you didn't just go and bake that bread, though. A good bread maker knows you have to take time to punch down that bread. It was really a good way to get out your aggression. And you would knead the bread in order for that bread to do what it needed to do. You see, bread, in order for it to rise appropriately the second time, has to be punched down and kneaded to then sustain the shape it has to maintain in the hot oven. If it doesn't get punched down a second time, then the gluten properties that are needed in order for it to maintain the molecules in place, it will lose its shape. It will lose its form. And so when I was making that bread, I knew the most important thing wasn't the first rise, it was the second rise that I had to punch down and knead. Some of us, we're going through life, we've risen the first time, and we're shocked when we get punched down. We're shocked when we go through some kneading in life. But what the Lord knows is that when we go and endure that process, we take on a shape of Christ-likeness. We take on a form of Christ-likeness. We take on the calling that Christ has for us. And it's actually the kneading and punching down process that prepares us for what it is that God has for us. And without it, we will not take the shape that is required to do what God has called every single one of us to do. The biggest battle I will fight always between who I am now and who I want to be. That's always going to be the biggest battle. Who I am today and who do I want to be tomorrow? And it's predicated on what am I doing today to be who I want to become tomorrow. The second thing is this. We see David declare the victory. So the first thing we see David do is he remembers the former victories. The second thing is we see David declare the victory. In 1 Samuel 17, looking at verse 45, David said to the Philistine, and remember what David is facing. David is in shepherd's gear looking at a giant. And this is what he has the authority, the confidence to say to the Philistine. You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, who you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands. I will strike you down. I will cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine armies to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by the sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. This is David talking some serious smack to Goliath. Now, he's not talking like this unless he's sure. He's not speaking like this unless he knows. And just before this, Goliath, if you back up in Samuel, you'll see Goliath was tormenting David. Before he ever launched a physical attack, he launched a psychological attack. And Goliath says to David some very key things as part of this psychological torment. He says, you are but a boy. Keep in mind, everybody had to be 20 or older. He's young. You are but a boy. You come at me with a stick. Remember, he had a shepherd's rod. He's disqualifying his profession. He's disqualifying what got him to that place. He's disqualifying who he is. And he says, that stick is for spanking the dogs. He cursed David's God. Your God's not going to deliver you. Your God's not going to honor you. Your God's not going to provide for you. Then he dishonors David's coming death, saying, I'm for sure going to kill you, and then I'm going to dishonor you in your death. Before we usually will experience any kind of physical battle, the enemy will always start with a mental battle. Yeah. It's part of why I'm so passionate about psychological science, as if we could begin to understand how the brain works, it transforms how we live our lives. You see, 80% of a person's daily thoughts are about themselves. 80%. That means on any given day, even the best mom on the planet is thinking 80% of the day about herself. Even the best, most giving, most loving husband is thinking 80% of the day about himself. 80%. Now, my words can't change my reality, but my words do change my perception of my reality. And if I change the way I perceive a situation, I change the way I engage the situation. I play it out like this. As a therapist, I usually help my clients understand it like this. If I think I'm a failure, I will believe I'm a failure, which then will make me make choices that a failure would make, so that when the failure comes, it reinforces my belief that I am a failure. Everything we look for in life confirms what I believe about myself already. So if 80% of my thoughts are about myself, and if everything I'm doing is experienced in that way, it's really important how we think. Now, your brain processes pain both physically and emotionally in the same part of the brain. That means if I get a broken heart, my brain doesn't know the difference between a broken heart and an amputated arm. My brain does not know the difference if it's physical pain or if it's emotional pain. So when David is in this battle and Goliath is launching a psychological torment upon him, his emotions undoubtedly would begin to be shaken. His thoughts and feelings about himself would undoubtedly start to wonder. And isn't that always the case when we go up into a battle against anything significant? Do I have what it takes? Am I strong enough? Am I able to resist this temptation? Am I going to be able to fight this battle? The battle always begins in the mind. In fact, if you look at the book, The Art of War, Sun Tzu says it this way. Every battle is won and fought before it's even fought. Every battle, because it's in the mind first. And so if I can win the battle in the mind, it's amazing how it changes things. And warriors don't negotiate. Warriors don't negotiate. In fact, I know this so true, and I want my kids to understand this so much. I make them recite daily affirmations every single day because I want them to know what they're going to say before the battle comes. So every single day, I make them say, because they're 4 years old, they have to say 4 things. So I make them say every day, I am smart, I am strong, I am brave, I am kind. When they turn 5, we'll add another affirmation. When they're 20, they're going to have 20 great things to say about themselves. Now notice, none of it has to do with what they look like or what their gifts are. It has to do with who they are. I am brave, I am strong, I am smart, I am kind. So that when the battle finds me, I know who I am and whose I am before the battle even has to be fought. It is so important that we get this into ourselves. David knew who he was, and he declared his victory before he even stepped foot on the battlefield. Here's some things, if you didn't grow up in a home where a mom made you recite things like this, here's some things, some declarations. Put this in your back pocket that you declare the next time you start to feel like you're being tempted, the next time you start to feel like you're in a battle. Number 1, Deuteronomy 28:13. I am the head, not the tail. Nehemiah 8:10, God is my source of strength. Deuteronomy 28:13, I am above and not below. Deuteronomy 28:6, I am blessed coming in, I am blessed going out. 2 Timothy 2:7, God has not given me a spirit of fear. 1 Peter 2:24, by his stripes I am healed. 1 John 4:4, greater is he who is in me than anything that's in this world. And finally, Revelation 12:1, we overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the power of our testimony. So what are you saying? What are you declaring? What are you speaking in that battle? Because your brain has to believe you. My brain is forced to believe what my mind tells it to. So if I tell myself I am more than a victor, then my brain has to believe I am more than a victor. Confidence comes from knowing who God says we are. Number 3, ready your weapons for victory. So number 1, we remember our victories. Number 2, we declare our coming victory. And number 3, we ready our weapons for victory. In verse 48, as the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone without a sword in his hand, and he struck down the Philistine and killed him. You see, I think a lot of us are in a battle, we're in a fight, we're at war, and we've showed up without our weapons. And when we show up without our weapons, we can't fight the fight the way God intended us to. You see, right before this passage, before David runs toward Goliath, Saul, trying to help David, had given him his armor, had given him his helmet, had given him his sword, had given him his metal armor, and was like, hey, here, take this as you go into battle. David tried it on, and it wasn't moving correctly, and so he literally takes it off and says, I know what I'm supposed to do battle in. So he walks up in his shepherd's gear. He doesn't walk up in armor. He doesn't have a helmet. He doesn't have a sword. Instead, he grabs 5 smooth, round stones from the stream nearby. And he grabs his sling, something he was very accustomed to. And in that moment of battle, he pulls out what he knows is going to work. Now, Andrew and I took a group of people from our church, about 50 people, probably 4 or 5 years ago now. We went on a trip to Israel, and we walked all throughout the Holy Land. And one of the places we went with our church was to the very place that David defeated Goliath. And I pulled this stone, this exact stone, I pulled out of the very stream where David would have collected his 5 smooth, small stones. And this stone is an exact replica of what it would have looked like that David grabbed. Now, this stone does not look very significant. This stone in the wrong hands can't do anything. But this stone in a warrior's hands, who's equipped to know how to do battle and how to fight the fight, can slay a giant. We're showing up to battle, though, without the weapons. And it's only weird until it works. stone looks weird until it worked. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people and I've said, hey, yeah, I'm going through a difficult time. They'll say, well, Christina, what are you doing? You know what? I'm just spending more time in prayer. Prayer? You're spending time in prayer? You really think that's going to change something? Absolutely. I know prayer changes everything. Christina, you're going through something hard. What are you planning on doing? I'm fasting. That season of infertility, you want to know what changed everything? We fasted until we saw our breakthrough. And I had people that came alongside me that fasted and prayed and believed with me. That's how things change. Hey, Christina, you're going through a hard time. What are you doing? I'm worshiping. I'm turning on some worship music and I'm declaring the goodness of my God and I'm believing that he's going to move. Hey, Christina, you're going through a hard time. What are you going to do? I'm rallying my church. I'm benefiting from my community. I'm calling my group. I'm talking to the people that I need to have my back so that when I'm in battle, I know I'm not alone because I don't battle against flesh and blood. I have to rally my weapons. And if we show up to battle without the weapons, we will be defeated. And some of us in this room, we've been in a fight and we're wondering why we keep getting smacked down. When was the last time you fasted? When was the last time you prayed? When was the last time you worshiped? When was the last time you called on your city group? When was the last time you utilized this community of strength to help you fight this fight? Because we're not meant to fight alone. We're meant to fight with our community. And there is a victory to be had. There is a victory to be had, but we have to ready our weapons for the fight. And the battle might be bigger than you, but it is not bigger than your God. It is never bigger than your God. You serve a God that can deliver you from every single situation. Last service, there was a little baby here, both ears completely deaf. Guess what? By his stripes, I am healed. So we laid hands and we believed and we prayed that yes, he may have been born deaf, but he's going to live hearing. This is how we fight our battle. And yet we're showing up to a battle weaponless. We've got to engage our weapons. And notice, David doesn't wait for victory. He races to victory. It says Goliath walked to the battle, but what does it say David did? He ran. He ran to lay hold of his victory. He ran to claim his victory. He didn't sit idly by and wait for victory to come to him. He went and got it. So you may need some victory today. What are you doing with your weapons to go take your victory, to claim your victory? I'm going to invite the team to come up, and I want to close with a couple of thoughts. See, I am so passionate about us understanding how to be prepared for this battle called life. I have been having way too many meetings with people who are thinking about ending their life. Way too many meetings with people who are thinking that they're not good enough. Way too many meetings with people who are thinking about backing out on life and leaving their families and abandoning their marriages and calling it quits. We are in a battle. We've got to change the way we're fighting this battle and start getting ourselves geared up and equipped for the battle that we're fighting. You see, when David was anointed for his position as king, Saul was the first king. Saul's the one he was talking to in these passages. David was anointed somewhere between ages 10 and 15 years old. He had to wait between 15 and 20 years to finally see the fulfillment of his role as king. 15 to 20 years of waiting, of wondering, of trusting, of hoping, of believing. But what we see is David knew how to do the fight. He knew how to remember the former victories. He knew in the moment how to declare the coming victory. And he knew what his weapons for victory were. You see, the battle qualifies me. The battle anoints me. The battle equips me. The battle strengthens me. The battle prepares me. The battle trains me. We can't live our whole lives resenting the battle when the battle is the very place that I'm the most blessed. When I was in my early 20s, I was serving in Cambodia as an associate missionary with the Assemblies of God. And so I was living in Cambodia, and I had this awesome opportunity to minister and teach English and help rescue children from sex trafficking. And it was one of the most amazing roles that I've ever had. While I was in Cambodia, I visited this place called the Killing Fields. If you know anything about human history, you know that in the mid to late 70s, there was a man named Pol Pot who equipped this group called the Khmer Rouge to do something that's now known as the Cambodian genocide. So back in the late 70s, these terrible men literally exterminated, the estimates are between 1.5 and 2 million human lives. 1.5 and 2 million human lives. Now, when I was visiting the killing fields, I'm walking through, it's literally called the killing fields, because right now there's over 23,000 documented mass graves in Cambodia. And I was walking through this place called the killing fields, and I would see a femur bone sticking up out of the ground. And I'd see the top of a skull. I'd see these horrific sights. And I'm walking around, and our guide is there with us, and I'm with one of the missionaries, and we're learning about the anguish of the Cambodian people, how they had so much taken from them. And this woman who was our guide, she began telling us about her experience, and her whole family was killed by the Khmer Rouge. This woman who would have been much younger when this happened, taking her time to show us around. Afterward, I was just talking to her and was like, how in the world are you able to walk us through the very place where your family lost their lives? And she said this, and I'll never forget it. She said, Christina, I made a decision that I wasn't going to allow it to embitter me. I was going to allow it to better me. And I thought, if there's anyone who could ever be justified in not fighting this battle, of sitting in solace and feeling sorry for herself. She lost her whole family. Nearly 2 million people in her country were exterminated. And she said, I'm not going to let it embitter me. I'm going to let it better me. And I thought in that moment, what a picture of what we're supposed to be doing with this thing called life. The problem is when we go through a battle, we let it embitter us. We let it make us sad for ourselves, feel sorry for ourselves, give up on the fight, run and hide in the hills. But what do we see David do? He reminds himself of his former victories. He declares the coming victory, and he knows what his weapons for victory are. And as a result, the blessing ahead was so much more significant than the battle behind, because he becomes the second king of Israel, and he sees untold blessing come as a result of his decision to be faithful in that moment. Today, you might feel like you're up against Goliath, and I don't know what 9-foot, 9-inch giant you're facing, but I do know this. God has given you weapons that when you know how to fight with them, you can slay any giant that is in your path. And so it doesn't matter how difficult that situation is. It doesn't matter how dark your season is. We serve a God who's faithful in season and out, because you are the head, not the tail. You are blessed going in, blessed going out. We serve a God who gives us victory even when we don't see a way. You see, one of the things I wonder is, what must the Israelite army thought when David walks up to battle, discards Saul's armor, and shows up with some stones? You may have some people in your life that are laughing at your choice to do battle, that are questioning your weapons of choice. I challenge you with this. You trust our God can deliver you from whatever giant you have to slay, because that's how good our God is.